Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl, and welcome back to Compassion in a T-shirt. It's week 3 of Movember, and a quick reminder, the donation link is in the show notes if you'd like to support this important cause. Today I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Jodi Richardson, a leading expert in understanding and managing anxiety. Jodi combines her professional expertise as a speaker, educator, and author with her deeply personal lived experience of thriving with anxiety. She's the co-author of Anxious Kids, a trusted resource for parents and teachers, and the author of Anxious Mums, which speaks directly to the challenges that mothers face. Beyond her books, Jodi delivers impactful workshops empowering parents, educators, and workplaces with strategies to navigate anxiety and foster well-being. And she has a podcast of her own called Well Hello Anxiety, which is a wealth of information and interviews all around the topic of understanding and managing anxiety. I was honoured to be on her podcast back on the 17th of July 2024, and the link to that is in the notes below. Get ready for a conversation filled with insights, compassion, and practical wisdom that can truly make a difference. And so I bring you Dr. Jodi Richardson. Good. All right. Well, Dr. Jodi Richardson, thank you very much for coming to speak with me on Compassion in a T-shirt.
It is my pleasure. It is very nice to be on the other side of the microphone, so to speak.
Yes, I'm excited to get to hear all about your stuff. You've been really studying and working in the area of anxiety for a long time, and that's something that you've developed a lot of expertise around and the books and so on. But so from your perspective, what is anxiety? What are some of the misunderstandings maybe around anxiety? How might some of those misunderstandings kind of make it harder to manage sometimes?
Oh, they're all such good questions. And I want to start with anxiety. What is it? Because we know that there's an epidemic. We know a lot of young people in particular are struggling, that we can see the numbers kind of really rising. But anxiety is also a very normal human emotion. It's not always a disorder, as you would well know. And so I remember back to my childhood when my brother and I used to ride our bikes, and we would cut through a vacant block with 25 cents each in our pocket to get lollies on a Friday after school. And this one afternoon, the magpies started swooping. And so the way I like to sort of help people think about anxiety as opposed to fear is that in that moment, I'm getting swooped by a magpie, I'm experiencing fear and pedal like crazy, and then maybe go the long way around until spring is over. The anxiety comes in as an anticipation of what might go wrong, or anticipation of a threat, so to speak. And so the anxiety kind of kicks in when you're home and you're thinking on a Friday morning, riding to the shops this afternoon, gosh, I wonder if I'm going to get swooped by a magpie. I get worried about that. The bodily changes start to, occur because anxiety is in our triggered kind of by a part of our brain, but it's a very physiological experience. We have a racing heart and changes to our breathing. And yeah, so the fear is in the present moment, I'm in danger. There is a danger here. The anxiety is the anticipation of a danger of sorts. And it's usually a danger that is not a real threat to safety. It's a challenge. It's something that's uncertain, that has an unknown outcome that can drive a lot of this kind of anxiety. I think
Okay.
one of the things that's often misunderstood is that we can outthink it and that we can snap out of it. And even some people with anxiety, and I live with an anxiety disorder, some people who live with anxiety sort of berate themselves. Why can't I snap out of it? Why can't I do the simple things other people can do, like pick up a phone and make a phone call to a shop to ask a question or organize insurance or check the latest energy prices. Sometimes what seems easy for some is really hard for people who have anxiety. There are different types of anxiety, but I think one of the huge misunderstandings, there's probably two ones I want to share. One, that we can just think our way out of it. Okay, that's not the way it works. And two, that we can get rid of it, and that we should try very hard to get rid of it. The reason that that is a problem is because it's a part of our brain that is there to keep us safe. We can't get rid of it. It's actually really important. But trying to not experience anxiety, trying to avoid anything that might make us feel anxious, ends up making our world very small because we stop doing the things that might cause a bit of anxiety. And it just makes the anxiety worse. So there are lots of misconceptions, but there are a couple of the key ones that, that I'm happy to share, obviously.
Yeah, I appreciate that distinction between fear and anxiety. I can sort of see what you mean there, that the fear is something perhaps in the moment when the threat is currently present in a way, or, and I can totally relate to the magpie thing because that was absolutely a big one for me growing up. If my mother's listening, she probably will recall, times where out on my bike, I get attacked by magpies and just abandon the bike and leave it there and run home. And
Yes.
she had to sort of brave the magpies to go down and get my bike.
Yeah.
So
Such an
I can.
Australian thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, I think. I can really relate to that because it is scary. There's a lot of fear there, and they literally sort of poke their beaks around the side of your head to try to sort of,
Yep.
but of course they're also in their threat system, I guess, too. If we sort of do the no blame, no shame thing for the magpie, I mean, they're trying to protect their young, and that's a kind of an evolved system in them as well. But it's also scary for us, and it probably works because it gets us to go away, and then you just worry about it, and that's the anxiety, the anticipatory anxiety of, you know. I can't go that way anymore. Or what if I go that way and I get attacked by another magpie, and let alone, the sort of, sometimes I remember getting teased by my mates because I was so scared in those moments. And so then the self-conscious sort of worry kicks in a bit as well. And then you mentioned too the kind of the self-criticism. We start to criticize ourselves for being angry, and we can be being anxious, and we can be angry about being anxious. And it all sort of starts to get a life of its own, even though the threat is now well and truly gone, I suppose, or at least in the moment it's not present. And
That is, it's such an important thing, I think, to really think about is that, and I think it's particularly hard too for parents if a child feels anxious about something when they're lying in bed, thinking about, we'll stick with the example of thinking about what could happen when they ride their bike,
mm,
being swooped by a magpie, or it could be thinking about having to go on camp next week, or thinking about, oh, I know we're working on this poster and I know the teacher is going to want us all to stand up in front of the class and present this poster, that when we're in bed and we're thinking about something that is anxiety provoking, we can have the same bodily responses. The brain doesn't really differentiate between I'm in a really dangerous situation and I need to be powered up to be able to fight like the magpies do or run away. And you're lying in bed and a parent might sort of think, oh, this doesn't make any sense. There's nothing logical about this at all. Like, why are you so worried about this? You're safe in bed, you're under your doona, you're loved, you've got a full tummy.
mm,
And so I think having this understanding that it's not always rational and that it is something that does change the way our bodies are functioning when we are thinking about things that cause anxiety, and that it's a real experience. It's a very physiological experience, and yet it's an emotion. It's very normal. For most people, it comes and goes depending on what's happening. For some, it's a disorder. For me, it's a disorder. I'm medicated for my anxiety and
mm.
do a lot of things to really look after myself. And I've got a big toolkit. But yeah, I think it's important to know that if a threat is real, or it's imagined or perceived, the body's responding in a similar way. And that's why it can be so hard for little kids or big kids or even adults, if you're really worried about something, to fall asleep in the first place, and to function well.
Let's have a think about sort of maybe when kids are going through the anxiety, because I know that's an area that you have put a lot of work into, and I can remember when I'm having all these reminiscences today about my own anxiety as well, but I can remember walking home from school, and the moment I got to the top of the street, if I couldn't see my mum's car outside, I would really start to panic, to worry. What's happened? Is she okay? Well, there was a kind of a sort of a separation, over anxious kind of thing there. And I remember she did this really interesting thing. She started to park the car. I only worked this out in reflection, by the way, much later on. But she parked the car just slightly further in the driveway each day, just to kind of gradually sort of the car was, to the point where I became more used to not being able to see the car when I got to the top end of the street. It was sort of almost, I think she was just intuitively doing a kind of an exposure thing. But what might be some of the practical things parents might do, or what are some of the strategies to help kids with their anxiety?
Oh, goodness, your mum. Aren't mums wise? Sometimes just instinctively mums know what to do, because I know
Yes.
when I was a kid and when you were a kid, there just wasn't the understanding that we have now. Yes, there's so much we can do. What I always love for anyone who's learning about anxiety to know is that it is treatable. There are a lot of strategies we can put into place. One of the things for young people is about starting to learn a bit about their brain and to learn about anxiety as an emotion. We can worry sometimes that by talking about things with our children, we might create a challenge or a problem, which is absolutely not the case. The best thing we can do is really normalize all feelings. So one strategy I love to use, and I have a 16-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl, and for a very long time I've used this idea, which comes from the work of Dr. Chris McCurry, and it's coping out loud. So the way I could start to teach my younger kids about anxiety was by saying, oh my gosh, I've got this funny feeling in my chest and my tummy. I think I'm feeling a bit anxious about a presentation that I'm giving tomorrow. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to just stop for a second, take a breath, have a nice long exhale. I'm going to do that a couple of times, and then I think that's going to really make a big difference for me. So my kids see me coming a mile away now when I'm trying to kind of covertly teach them something. But all the years of sharing a bit about my experiences as they're unfolding has helped them to kind of learn more and more and more about emotions, that they come and they go. They're not alone in experiencing what is going on for them. And anxiety, in the same way kids feel sad or left out or disappointed or just feeling nervous, because there's lots of different emotions. Anxiety is a normal human emotion. So helping young people to really understand that, yes, you get a few butterflies in your tummy, your heart might race a little bit before you do something important. That's so normal. Everybody feels like that. Let's take some breaths. All right. And then one of the things you can do next is help them focus their attention on something that's more present focused. Because if a child is anxious, they're constantly thinking about whatever is causing the threat, the presentation, the camp, dad going away for a work trip, mum going away for a work trip. So if we can bring that attention away from the worry and the threat, that the brain's alarm is going, well, that's possible danger, help them bring their attention back into the present. That can be really powerful as well.
So there's sort of there's that little bit of information or education or psychoeducation, obviously pitching it right, I suppose, but also expressing it through a kind of a modeling, I think is sort of what you're saying, that when we are open about our own feelings and some of the challenges that we might have, and maybe some of the strategies we might use, then that just sort of goes across to the kids too, and they start to sort of almost sort of embody all of that themselves just through observation, through modeling, and that sort of thing. But with a couple of particular, strategies there that you mentioned, the breathing and kind of that physiological side. And then in CFT, we often think of the mind as like a spotlight, not that which it shines upon, I guess, and so the challenge is to, shift the spotlight sometimes. There might be something in the present moment that we can shift the spotlight to, and kind of, as opposed to the more worry, anxiety related kind of thoughts and concepts like that.
Yeah.
What about when the parents themselves are quite anxious, and whether it be mums or dads, like I remember obviously, kind of having anxious thoughts and feelings myself as a dad too. But yeah, what are your thoughts there when it comes to sort of the parents themselves and their anxiety and managing all of that?
Mm. Oh gosh, it's really the best place to start because when we're with another person, when we're in the company of another person in real life, IRL, as my kids would say in a text, we can either share our anxiety or share our calm. We are built to pick up on the cues that we get from the person that we're spending time with. And like for listeners, you might be able to relate to the idea that you've caught up with someone and you can just tell they haven't even said anything yet, but you can just tell body language, facial expressions, posture, tension. It's amazing what we're actually processing without realizing it. So one of the things that we know is very powerful for us as adults is to reduce our own stress, manage our own stress, and be able to learn how to settle our nervous system. You may or may not be a parent. If you are a parent, you are then in a better position to be able to share your calm with your child when they're feeling stressed or anxious about something. Or if you're not a parent, it could be your partner, or it could be a sibling or a co-worker. Because what we don't often learn is that it's actually we're biologically quite well equipped to cope with stress, but we're not equipped to cope with chronic stress. So we need to be able to end that stress cycle. So I'll give an example. So there is a manager and a staff member has resigned, and the manager is feeling very, very anxious about all the work that needs to be done. The staff member hasn't given any notice, or they've been marched out, depending on what's going on. This anxiety is building, all right? That stress is starting to really show in the way that they're thinking and feeling in their body, okay? So anytime the manager starts to think, how are we going to cope, it activates the stress response. Heart rate goes up, breathing changes, blood moves from the gut to the arms and legs, literally so we can fight or run away. So all of these changes power us up to do something. Now, if you're sitting at your desk just constantly worried about what's going to happen, then we don't give our body a chance to kind of close that loop and finish that stress cycle. And so one of the important things to do is to know how to do that. And a really powerful way is movement, because the brain and the body are expecting us to do something. They're waiting, like, I've detected a threat, you're powered up, you've got to fight or you've got to flee. What are you going to do? And yet, if we do nothing, we're fueled in this way that feels really uncomfortable and awful. So movement can help close that loop and bring that kind of cycle to a natural end. The breathing strategy that I shared before, breathing in and lengthening the exhale. So maybe breathing in for 3 and out for 6, or in for 4, out for 8. The longer exhalation actually starts to slow the heart rate, and that's another way to kind of close out that loop. So back to your original question, if you are a parent who, gosh, is anxious, and this was me for a very long time, when we can take care of ourselves and find the strategies and create the moments in our day to really ground and settle our nervous system, then we can show up in a way that is more calm so we can better co-regulate our kids. And we're in a better place to be able to think more clearly, because when you're very stressed and anxious, you can't think properly. There's good reason for that. But when we're calmer, then we can respond to our kids rather than reacting and getting wound up more by any anxiety or stress that they might be showing, which is inevitable because life's pretty tough. So look after yourself if you're a parent, but also start to really help your kids understand anxiety and to develop their own skills for being able to dial it down as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. The way I've almost interpreted it is that you could almost see your own anxiety as a bit of an opportunity in a way. You know, it's as unpleasant as it can be, and you know, sort of, don't get me wrong with that, but in a way, it's an opportunity because if we're able to sort of down-regulate some of that and use some of those strategies, it sort of spreads in a way. We're able to co-regulate in a sense, and it can if we can bring a calmness to any given situation, for example, with our kids, then that helps to create a calmness for them, and then we're all sort of thinking differently. You know, once we're sort of in that calmer state, so it's kind of an opportunity to sort of to kind of create that spread with others around us. Where does anger fit in for you? When you mentioned a variety of feelings before, there was sort of the anxious and nervous and the sad or disappointed. What about anger? That's just popped to mind. You know, what are your thoughts there when it comes to where it might fit with anxiety?
Yeah, look, anger is one of those big emotions that it's so good that we're talking about it. Just before I answer that question, I realize that it's probably worthwhile for me to kind of explain that really when we're anxious, we're affected in kind of 4 key ways. It affects the way we think, lots of worry, lots of what ifs, catastrophic thinking. It affects the way our body changes, so sensations. It affects our emotions, as you've just asked me about, and we can be teary or angry. And it also affects what we do, and that's where avoidance comes in a lot because, oh, it doesn't feel good, I'm not going to do it. So it affects our kind of actions. But coming back to the emotions, some people do feel angry when they're anxious. And if we think about it kind of from the brain has detected a threat because really our brain's job is to keep us alive. Doesn't really care how happy we are. The brain has detected a threat. The brain says, right, we've got to protect ourselves from this. We're powering up for fight or flight. And, you know, if we're powering up to fight, to save our lives, which is what the brain thinks we need in this moment, then it stands to reason that anger is an emotion that can come alongside that. There can also be anger and frustration about and that self-criticism about, I hate that I feel this way. Why do I respond like this? Why can't I respond like James or Jackie or Joe or Jill? And anger, whilst it can be very obvious, it can often be something that is coming out as a result of other emotions that are happening underneath. And so finding healthy ways to express it, because we really do need to be able to express how we feel, is important. But I'd be interested to know how you support clients to express anger in healthy ways. I've got some ideas, but I'm always looking for more if you've got an idea or two.
Yeah. Well, I'm having another sort of childhood flashback, to be honest, and recalling a situation where I think fueled with the anxiety and yeah, maybe there was fear in that moment as well. You just given your distinction there, but and arriving home and you're kind of knocking on the door and no one coming to the door and you know starting to panic, starting to knock harder, starting to get angry, anger coming out, kicking the door. It happened to be a glass door. The glass smashed. And I'm sort of revealing that it's actually in some ways a bit of a shame memory, that particular one. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the real stings in the tail with anger, isn't it? And especially when you're a child or an adolescent, and for different people and the different genders, sometimes our anger is more or less accepted and that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
you're actually anxious, but the anger and the expression of that anger actually causes you to get into more trouble, or to even be, shamed in that moment, and so on.
Mm.
And so, like it is very interesting to think, how might we kind of process/express that feeling.
Mm.
My basic sense there, from a compassion focused therapy point of view, is how might we shift the threat system activation, the anxiety, anger that might be there, to a compassionate motivation that can also still involve assertiveness, and the expression of assertiveness and compassionate assertiveness, that might be about, understanding the motives behind the anxiety and the anger. That the anxiety might be a real threat protection motive. The anger, perhaps there's some sort of transgression, or a sort of a need to be heard or seen, and trying to understand those motives, and then compassionately move towards assertiveness, where we're able to still achieve those end goals, but keeping in mind the sort of the needs and motives of the other as well in that situation. So that's just sort of one little thought that comes to mind. I'd be very curious to hear what your thoughts are as well. But
Oh, you know, I really admire you for sharing what you shared, and it's got me thinking about, sort of thought, when have I been really, really angry? Because we do feel ashamed of ourselves, the way we kind of behave, I suppose, sometimes when we feel angry. And I'll never I mean, I've got two examples, but perhaps one that's a little bit easier to share in this forum
mm,
is when I had a need to adjust my diet for reasons that I was having a lot of gut health challenges. And
mm,
it was an extremely restricted diet. So you
mm,
wonder what I ate when I tell you what I couldn't. I couldn't have
mm.
coffee or alcohol, or not that that was a big part of my life, coffee or alcohol or sugar or wheat or dairy or yeast or gosh, there was something else. Anyway,
A long list.
didn't leave. I don't think I could have soy either. It,
Oh.
it was a very, very restricted diet, and it was the last ditch effort to try to solve this problem, which
Mm,
was solved actually. And I had to do that for 18 months, right? So you can imagine the learning curve for me is to find food and to source it, to buy it, very expensive trips to the health food store, et cetera, et cetera. And I found this recipe where I could make something that had natvier in it, like a sweetener. And I could make something that was pretty healthy, but felt like a treat. I'm such a sweet tooth. I made it, I baked it, I put it on the kitchen bench. My mum was here, kids were little. I went outside, came back, and the dog had eaten it all.
oh, yeah.
And I was sleep deprived with postnatal depression and two tiny kids, and I lost it. It was just one more thing on my plate. And I was so mad. I think I grabbed the tray and I just smacked it on the ground. Like you're kicking the
Yeah.
door. I think we have this
Mm,
need sometimes to kind of do something that's physical.
mm,
It's almost like we want to express this kind of rage, and we don't want to do it in a way that hurts us, hurts anybody, breaks anything. Sometimes that happens. But that's not ideal. So the ideas that I share when I'm asked for suggestions
mm.
are things like go outside and bounce a ball, like throw a ball down so that you're bouncing a ball, is like, so you're, because the body-based, the bottom-up strategies, the body-based strategies can help us to kind of express use up the adrenaline and the cortisol and the blood flow changes, etc.
Mm.
other things that have a really good cathartic kind of scream, which can send the neighbours running. And so we've got to be mindful of who's around and what we're doing and when we're doing it and why.
Yeah.
When I was struggling with postnatal depression and struggling hugely with getting my little girl to sleep, the nurse said, if you need to kind of let it out, then just grab a pillow and have a good yell into a pillow. Because we have this need, don't we? And we do see that anger doesn't have to be connected with violence in any way. It's an emotion. We feel it. We want to express it, but we want to do it in really safe and healthy ways. Exercise is another brilliant thing to do. Like, just don't do a hamstring, but just go for a run or just do something with your body. And yeah, any one of those can make a difference. It's about us finding what works for us. But I think a bigger part of it is kind of, if it's happening often, then there are things, no doubt, that require attention and time and care and compassion. So it's finding out what's below all of this. If it's not an isolated incident once or twice in a period of time.
It's a bit like you were saying before, that with anxiety too, but also with anger, perhaps it's the closing of that stress loop sort of idea, and that often something physical is a way to do that, because the system that's activated there is such a physical system. It's such a fight flight sort of a system, and to try to hold that back or sort of repress that urge, too much, I suppose, is likely to just maintain that system activation. The sort of the delicate balance is expressing it in a way that's kind of really not harmful to self or others, and
Exactly.
sometimes when one is angry, one might feel the urge to sort of bang on the wall or something, but then they have a sore hand, sort of a thing. And so finding that those having a little suite of options that help with the expression, but without harm. I remember I'm in Queensland, and we have what houses called Queenslanders. I don't know if you've heard of that,
Yes,
but
I do know Queenslanders. I've spent a lot of time. I've got a lot of family in Queensland.
there you go. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Queenslanders are often up on stilts, and also sometimes not quite at head height. And so I used to have a Queenslander, and whenever I went underneath to get the mower or something like that, I would quite often bang my head on the
I knew you were going to
on
say
the
that.
thing. Yeah, and it would sort of trigger an anger response, and
Yeah.
so at some point I decided to do that vocal expression that you mentioned, but rather than screaming with fury, I would go Yahoo like that, and it would sort of
Yeah.
it would get it out, but at the same time not concern or disturb the people, because it had
Yes.
a slightly less kind of aggressive tinge to it. But yeah, finding little strategies that sort of, people, I guess, finding their own little ways of having that expression and being
Yeah.
able to ultimately, yes, it's about kind of trying to down regulate threat and so on.
Yeah, definitely. I know in COVID times, because we're obviously Melbourne based, and with all of
Mm,
the lockdowns, it was horrendous. It was so hard, and I was using this idea of get out of your head and into your body with the kids. They were grades 4 and 6, kind of in the thick
mm,
of it. And we had this ball. It's like a silicon spiky ball, but it's not spiky. That's very soft,
mm,
like tiny little rubber tentacles all over it. And sometimes when we needed to kind of get out of our head and into our body, we'd play catch. So it was soft enough to sort of throw inside. Sometimes we'd go outside so we could hurl it a bit. And sometimes I didn't know if my son was hurling it at me because there was so much to express,
just
so much
yeah.
frustration, disappointment, and just confusion. And so sometimes what I'd do is we'd go outside, and we've got a property here, and I'd give us a really big distance so he could really get his body into it. And that was a very cathartic thing to do as a parent, just get our kids moving and doing something, you don't even have to tell them what you're doing. It's just like, okay, we need to get out, we need to move, we need to do something. And that can be a way of kind of letting them express what's happening. And they're the kind of balls that are quite sort of good to sort of throw at the floor too, because they just go splat and then they bounce back. And whacking a
Yeah.
balloon is another really good one because
Mm.
you can give it a good whack. It's not going to hurt anyone. It's not dangerous in any way, but it's a body-based way to express emotion, anger, disappointment, frustration, all the feelings. If we need a body-based way to do it, there's lots of really good ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, great. No, I love the sound of all of that. I can see that quite apart from your expertise in kind of anxiety and with anxious kids and anxious mums and so on, you live it, you embody it, you do it, with your own family, and that's such a beautiful thing, especially thinking back to those lockdown years in Victoria. I mean that's from where we were sitting, we were sort of that looked very, very tough.
Yeah.
One of the other things that you do quite a bit of is sort of presenting in workplaces and sort of that more workplace oriented kind of addressing anxiety in the workplace, I suppose. You could tell us a bit about that, or your work there, or some of the stuff that you might kind of present in that context.
Oh, I love my work. I almost don't want to call it work because it feels like a real privilege, and I know it's a great responsibility that people put their trust in me to come into their workplaces to talk to staff about stress and anxiety, and not only kind of their own experience, but supporting their colleagues, or if they're a leader, supporting their staff. And so in kind of workplaces, I tend to be asked to speak more about stress, anxiety, and well-being, but more and more lately, I've been talking about the science of happiness as well, and really busting some myths around happiness and helping people to sort of think. And I'm very practical. I always like to give practical things for people to do so that they can take action and make change. In schools, I work with principals and like the executives in schools to support them with their own mental health and well-being, because burnout, stress, sleeplessness are really huge challenges. I also work with staff around the same kind of topics, but also professional development, so staff feel better equipped and more confident to support anxious kids. And a lot of schools will also invite me to do a parent event to speak to parents. And in fact, schools are now asking me also to come and speak to students.
Huh.
I tend to speak to sort of more senior students, more kind of year 9s to 12, because by that age, I feel like they've got they can really make sense. I make it fun and engaging, and I take balloons and chocolates, and there's lots of bribery going on, but they usually have a good time. But I feel like by that age, a year 9 has probably thought about maybe asking someone on a date, and they're thinking about putting in a resume for a part-time job, and they've had enough life experience that when I start to talk about in relatable ways the concept of anxiety, that it actually kind of lands. Yeah, so
Mm.
yeah, it's a real joy. That's a
Mm.
huge part of my life, is my speaking.
Mm.
So yeah, thank you
Yeah.
for asking about that.
Yeah.
It's really lovely
Well,
to have a chance to share more.
it's piqued my curiosity, especially about, the myths of happiness that can be busted. I mean, can you give us
Yeah,
a taste of that stuff? I'm
yes,
very
of
curious.
course, of course. Well, one of them is, it is not normal to be happy all the time. It is not normal to be happy all the time. And yet we look around at neighbors, friends, online, and we think, gosh, everyone else is going along in life pretty well. Why am I the only one that's having problems?
Mm.
And I read a beautiful word the other day, and it was sonder. And sonder is the word that describes the realization that other people have troubles too.
Oh, it's a lovely one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, there's
Mm.
a dictionary of obscure sorrows. I think that was an excerpt of that
Oh.
in a well-being magazine I was reading.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so I know for myself that I studied the science of happiness, which other people will call positive psychology. I studied that. I guess my own turning point with my mental health was when undiagnosed anxiety for 25 years led to major depressive disorder for me.
Mm.
So that was a huge turning point in my life and set me on the path to kind of understanding mental health and happiness and well-being, for myself firstly, and then obviously for others. And yeah, so I used to think, gosh, what is wrong with me? Why has everyone else got it going on? And I have these ups and downs. And I guess when I was in my 20s, you didn't have the access to kind of what other people were experiencing through social media. People didn't often want to talk about it. So this idea that life can be so rich and full of meaning and purpose, and joy, but to know that with that can come a great deal of sorrow and pain, and having this idea that it's not normal to be happy all the time. And if it was, you'd live a pretty shallow life because you wouldn't have loved anyone and lost them. You wouldn't have ever owned and loved a dog or a pet. You might not have strived for something and not quite got there. And so people who kind of want to live a life of pure happiness rob themselves of so much.
Mm.
And there's no shade on the way anybody approaches life. We all come from our backgrounds, our history, our environment, our parenting, our genes. But I did learn, and it was a huge learning, that it is okay to feel every emotion that comes up. It is important to know how to manage it, how to express it in appropriate ways, in appropriate places at appropriate times. And that the more we can be accepting, and this is where self-compassion is just a huge part of the way I cope with difficult emotions that are a part of life, is this idea that I can be kind to myself. And when I can show acceptance of what is happening for me at the moment, then I move through that sort of stormy kind of time more easily and more quickly than I would have had I just kind of tried to kind of push it all away and cheer myself up. So that's a myth that I've been teaching my kids, have been kind of practiced on for a long, long time. And I when I'm at home, my temperament is one of being a fairly cheerful person, but I'm not like, I feel quite cheerful and relaxed and content and calm talking to you. But we recently had a very painful, sort of distressing kind of period in our lives where a very dearly beloved family member passed away just a couple of weeks ago. So I have my moments, and my son said to me, "You okay?" A week or so ago, when mum didn't look her normal kind of relaxed and cheerful self. And I said, "I'm not really. I'm actually feeling really sad at the moment, but that's okay. The ups and downs, this is all part of it." And he's 16, and he just gave me a hug and said, "Yeah, I get it, mum. Can I do anything for you?" He's so sweet. And then just a few days ago, he was looking a bit despondent. And I said, how's things? And he said, "Oh, I've got a few things going on. I don't feel like talking about it." And I said, "Oh, that's all right, mate. I just kind of noticed that you didn't quite seem yourself." He goes, he said, "I'm not happy all the time, but I've got it covered. If I need any help, I'll reach out." And I'm like, I really wanted to know what was going on. But he basically said, "I'm okay. I've got it covered. I'll ask you if I need help." And he was accepting of how we felt in that moment. And I just had a little kind of moment where I thought, it's really actually happening here, that these kids of mine are really taking on board these ideas. And yeah, it's, life's hard. There's so many ups and downs. That's why I love your work. I love your work so much. When I first came across the work of Dr. Neff, who we've both interviewed on our podcast,
Yes.
when I studied the science of happiness many, many years ago, I was like, oh man, this is what I need.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yes, the myth is that I should be happy, and if I'm not, there's something wrong with me. That's kind of the myth,
Yes,
isn't it? And the
totally.
the sort of the well, it's sort of double-edged in a way. I mean, the sort of life isn't always happy, and life can involve frustrations and disappointments and challenges and actual really sort of loss and pain sometimes, and that sort of we have happiness and we have all these other emotions at the same time, but the really well, two nice pieces there that you remind us about, and one is that that common humanity piece, in a sense, that actually, yeah, that sonder, that recognition that that it's like that for all of us. When that's something that we're really not alone in the sort of that experience. And the other piece that you remind us is that happiness is lovely. Absolutely, it is lovely, but it also
Yes.
doesn't give us a lot of kind of, I don't know, depth or growth and it sort of would mean that we would be missing out on a whole bunch of things that are actually very, very meaningful in life if we were to always just simply be happy. That in a way, sometimes painful feelings are kind of themselves a measure of something that's been deeply, deeply meaningful, important in our lives, cherished. I have mentioned on this podcast before, but we lost our beloved dog Bruno last year in October,
Oh,
and
sorry.
yeah, but so it's okay now that the but that was he was only 8. It was really quite sudden. There was all of this sort of stuff, and just really recognizing just how important he was, how ever present he was, how much joy he did bring, and to really honor that now, and even with the pain, in a sense, is kind of
Yeah.
honoring of who he was in our lives. And so that all of that is really yeah, it's beautiful, really, to be able to sort of connect to the rainbow of feelings and experiences that life is, and the gift that all of that can bring us.
I, I'm sorry to hear about Bruno, and I'm a huge dog lover, and it's just heartbreaking when you do lose a family member in
Yeah.
that way. And time, the passage of time does help ease the pain.
Mm.
But I love that you came back to this idea that it is true, like happiness and joy, it's delightful. It is delightful. We were cracking up on the couch last night. We've got a big couch in our family room, and we were watching. It's on YouTube. It's called Daily Dose of Internet, and it's a bit like you know just all the funny things that have been captured on camera. And we laughed and laughed, and I was in the moment laughing, but also had a little moment where I thought, how nice! It's so good to have a belly laugh. Like I was obviously just I was very amused, highly amused by um, and it's these things, they're kind of like beautiful nutrients for us, aren't they? Because there's not much fun when there's pain and misery and distress all the
Yes.
time, of course.
Yeah.
And certainly, please, if you're feeling that way and you're listening or watching, then please reach
Yes.
out for some help. But yeah, and one of the things I say to students when I'm speaking to them is I'll say, who has been really joyful lately, or had a huge laugh, or felt super really happy about something, and lots of hands go up. And
Mm.
then I'll say, are you feeling that way right here, right now with me? And I'll make a bit of a joke about I won't take it, personally if they're not feeling joyful in my company. And just to kind of like exemplify this idea that it doesn't last. It's beautiful in the moment, but it doesn't last. And with a view to helping them to kind of think about the bad emotions, the ones we don't like, they don't last either if we know how to deal with them. And yeah, so I mean, it's brilliant to be talking about all of these things because my beautiful assistant says, she's decided that in life it's a roller coaster. There's ups and there's downs, and every now and again you get to glide.
Ah, yes.
got to enjoy the glide. But as we know as adults, lots of challenges.
Yeah.
Hopefully lots of gliding, but not always the case.
I actually appreciate what you said because I'm gonna slightly kind of refine what I said before actually because it's also not true that happiness is meaningless or something like that, is it? I mean, it can be very, very meaningful to share a very happy time with friends or family, and sometimes we are able to think back to those times and feel a bit of it again, and those are absolutely gifts as well. But I suppose the key busting of the myth is more that all of these emotions come and go, and happiness does too, but other ones do as well. I mean, if people are persistently feeling great difficulties, then there can be things to do and people to see that might be really helpful with that. But that general kind of sense that emotions come and go is really an important point. You mentioned self-compassion. And obviously, yeah, this particular channel slash podcast is very interested in compassion and self-compassion. And you sort of alluded to, kind of self-compassion being kind to yourself. What can you sort of riff off that a little bit more? What are your thoughts about self-compassion in the context of anxiety, I guess, just to bring it back to that particular area?
It has been such a balm for me and my anxious brain, self-compassion. And I think in my experience and people's experience of anxiety can be really different, that when we don't have compassion for ourselves and when we don't have a good understanding of kind of why we feel the way we do and what's kind of happening in our brain and body, we can get really annoyed at ourselves. I used to, especially being a woman in business, I have my own business, and as you know, there's so much. I mean, we were talking earlier, there's so much to do. And being able to help people to find your work requires you to put yourself out there, share more about yourself, share some photos, write some, and something like that is can be really anxiety provoking for some people. And anything we start that's new, that's important, can obviously bring some anxiety. And so I remember for a long time sort of thinking with my anxiety, and this is before I was medicated, because I just thought for a long time I could therapy and exercise my way out of my anxiety. And I was still learning. And I thought, when the anxiety's gone, I'll do this. When I feel better, I'll do that. And I'll get so mad at myself because I couldn't find it within myself to do the things that were really important. And that only makes you feel worse. And it only drives more anxiety. What we know about self-compassion is this idea that, hey, I am struggling right now. This, rather than kind of being lost in it, just this awareness of, yeah, this is actually really hard. And that alone, just go, actually, you are trying to do something that's really hard here. Like, this is, and for some people that's picking up a phone. Like for my mum, she gets so anxious having to pick up the phone and make a phone call. So we can get really down on ourselves and quite critical of ourselves. And so it's a huge kind of turnaround when we can show ourselves compassion. And it also helps to settle down the physiology. It's a real balm for our nervous system as well, in that we can immediately, the moment we say, hey, I'm really having a hard time here, and then I'm obviously thinking about the way I practice self-compassion. I think, well, there are so many people who are struggling like this right now, this common humanity. And I'll share a story with you in a second where I had to show myself so much compassion because the beating up was real, and you'll understand why in a minute, the mental beating up. Yeah, and then this idea that, okay, when I can show myself some kindness, we actually can settle down all of the critical thinking and the physiological kind of response, and be in a much better place, not only feel better, be treating ourselves more kindly, but also in a much better place to be able to do the thing that we couldn't do to begin with. And the compassion also, I think, with anxiety is there can be, depending on the type, What if I get it wrong? What if I go in a group of people and I say the wrong thing? If you're socially anxious, what if I present my leadership proposal to the assistant principal because I want to be a year 6 leader and I muck it up? When we have that compassion focused lens, we can have that kind of what if thinking and then go, well, what if that happens? Well, I'll be okay. I'll be okay, because that you start to bring that lens of kindness rather than criticism. But I'll share with you something that happened, and this was just Sunday. So we're recording this on Friday. So this was just not even a week ago. And I never thought I'd talk about it because it's so embarrassing. But
Oh.
I realized, you know what? A big part of what I want to do is really humanize making mistakes as well. And I'm very open about my mental health. And what happened was this. We had concert tickets to see Tate McRae, and she's a Canadian singer, dancer, amazing. My daughter loves her. We've had those tickets for a year. Tickets were for Saturday. I had it in my calendar for Sunday. We got all dressed up, booked a parking, drove into Melbourne. It's over an hour away, and got to the arena and thought, which gate are we going in? And I checked my phone wallet for my tickets and they had expired.
Oh.
And that moment of realization was sickening. It's the first concert we'd ever booked 12 months ago. She's lucky she's been to a couple of really big concerts in between because we just love music. But you can imagine what I was saying to myself. How could you be so stupid? This is just such a ridiculous thing to happen. I was in so much pain, and the blame was on me. It was my fault. There's no one else to blame. She immediately said, "Don't worry, Mum. Everybody makes mistakes." There was a part of me that kind of thought, it would almost be easier if you were mad at me. I don't know why I was thinking that.
Yeah.
But I was being so hard on myself. It almost didn't equate that she was being so kind. And I wrote a message to my husband and just said, and he wrote back with such kindness and said, "I am so, so sorry." Pretty much I cried half the way home trying to drive very safely. And she had a good cry later as well. And I talk about this with her permission. But I apologized. She said, "Mum, you don't need to apologize anymore. Everybody makes mistakes." And I had to draw on my self-compassion, because when it first happened, I was sort of feeling like, how am I going to get through this? Like, I've just created so much disappointment, which is the opposite of the way I like to roll in life. And the self-compassion was exactly what I needed. And I feel like I've processed it and been so kind and compassionate to myself. Plus, it's completely out of my control. And a big part of my thinking, one of my big thinking tools, is what's in my control right now. And I can't do anything. The concert's gone. There's no more tickets. I was even looking at, can we fly to New Zealand? We weren't going to do that. All the problem solving, fix this, make it better. In the end, no, there's no fixing this. This is painful and this is disappointing. And we're on the other side. And the compassion, honestly, it's human to make mistakes. Please learn from my example. Anyone listening, just double check. But it was a game changer, Stan. Honestly, it was a game changer. It really, really was. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I can only imagine that people listening will relate in one way, shape, or form. Perhaps not exactly that scenario, although potentially very similar sorts of ones. We all, that is that common humanity piece, and it's very, very sort of generous of you to kind of help us all kind of understand and normalize our own reactions to these sorts of situations. The other thing that stands out for me there is just the lovely way that both of your kids seem to be compassionate themselves towards others. You know, your son in that earlier example, but your daughter there was kind of offering compassion and kindness and so on in that
Yeah.
moment, even though she was probably also, really very disappointed maybe by what happened. The thing
Mm,
that's so interesting
yeah.
is how hard it can be to receive compassion from someone else, isn't it? You
Mm.
know, in some ways, that's off. As much as she was saying it's okay, it's all right, no need to apologize, or your husband was like, "I'm so sorry this happened." Like it can be really hard to take on that compassion. Sometimes it's the self-compassion piece that can then, soften things and open us up to, that more shared sense of compassion for each other and across the various flows.
True. You're so right. I wasn't open to her compassion at the start. I was just so furious with myself and
Mm,
lots of thoughts and emotions that came with that about letting her down. I'd been away for work for 4 days. I'm like, oh, am I working too much? All of the kind of thoughts that our mind will
mm,
send us,
yeah.
which were not helpful. But you're right, in that initial moment, it was really hard. But as the fact that she said and Peter said, and even gorgeous Hunter, because obviously we came home and I was not in a good state, and
Yes.
that they were just so kind, and I think what you said before about the modeling, like,
Yeah.
I mean, for anyone listening, watching, like, it's not like Mary Poppins home, or I know Mary Poppins wasn't the parent, but we still have our challenges in our home with
Yes.
various things that we like kids to do differently, and all the stuff that goes on. But I just think, because of my own journey with my anxiety, I've learned so much about mental health and well-being, and I model it. I I share it, I teach it in my home. What I teach in my home, I take into other places and share. And it just takes time. So if parents listening and thinking, well, gosh, I've been doing it this way. Well, now there's more tools in the toolkit, and just to try on for size, because it's a long journey with parenting. And sometimes we might plant seeds that we won't see grow for quite a long time. But eventually you'll see a little green shoot and you'll go, oh, yes. And yeah, and that's so much beauty in parenting.
Yes.
Yeah, lots of dead branches still to prune, to keep with the metaphor. But yeah, it is
Yes.
it's beautiful to see the kind of people that they're growing up into, because um yeah, we support each other. And I don't lean on them. I don't rely on them for my emotional support, but I also, if I'm in a state where I need to express how I feel, they're not afraid of that. I obviously am mindful of the way that I express how I feel, and um, and what I say and do, of course.
Mm,
We can't just let it all hang out in front of our kids all the time. But they've
mm,
learned that emotions are normal. It's healthy to express them, and that we move through it, and that you,
mm,
you can always ask somebody for help if you need it. But build
mm,
the skills to help yourself as well. So
yeah.
it's nice to have that reflection. Nice to have that
Yes.
reflection.
No, and it's the flow, isn't it? It's the flows across, being able to have that kind of reciprocal thing. And in a way, it's a bit of a gift to another person to open ourselves up to their compassion. They get to be the one that's sort of in the compassionate role. But look, I think that's probably a wonderful place to bring our conversation to a close. Dr. Jodi Richardson, I've really appreciated all that. I just love the way that you bring the sort of the science and the theory and the knowledge and the practicality of, sort of trying to manage anxiety, but also the lived experience of it all, and just that willingness to share, how it's both challenged you, but also, some of these things that just feel so satisfying in terms of how we're able to live our lives. So, thank you very much for being willing to chat on compassion in a t-shirt.
You are welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks very much.